want to take off my hair. I hate when the sun comes out like that.
Are you in your university office room, Kiran, or your home?
Oh, this is actually now my home office during the pandemic.
I know. All virtual classes?
Yes, we're doing, I mean, I do use my office as well sometimes, but yes, all our classes are virtual because I teach political science. But if you're in the biology class or geography class, there are some lab days. Yeah, but we don't, I mean, I don't have them because you can teach political science online, which is really boring, which can be boring, I guess, more for the students, but yeah.
I think we are live, so let's discuss. Welcome, everyone. We are virtually gathered here today to discuss a very important issue, strip searches in custody and detentions, which are an assault on human rights, on human dignity. Even though it's been an unfortunate common practice of Turkish custodies for a long while, in the historical context of Turkey, the strip search, a serious violation of human rights, came to the fore when 30 young women were unlawfully detained and strip searched while in police custody in August 2020 in Turkey, in the Uşak police station, I mean. Besides this degrading incident, detainees were subjected to ill treatment in custody. Lately, strip search was again brought to the attention of the general public as several prominent human rights advocates, journalists, and especially Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu, HDP Member of Parliament, encouraged victims to share their personal experiences of this violation and mobilize the civil society to urge government officials to take an action to end strip search in custodies. The movement became viral in a couple of days as countless women as well as men shared their stories on social media. The United Nations Bangkok Rule 20 indicates that alternative screening methods such as scans shall be developed to replace strip searches and invasive body searches in order to avoid the harmful psychological and possible physical impact of invasive body searches. So today at Set Them Free, we will doing this panel discussion on the incidents of strip search to raise awareness on this degrading act and create a platform for experts to discuss how to combat such violations in collaboration with global human rights organizations and advocates. I would like to introduce our panelists, Kiran Nazish, founding director of Coalition for Women in Journalism, and Hafsa Kesinci, lawyer and human rights activist. Today, she is representing the Movement for Unconditional Justice. And welcome again. Kiran, I know that you're closely following Turkey along with many other undemocratic countries in terms of human rights and justice. I want to ask you that, is strip search a common practice in the Middle East and South Asia?
Thank you so much, Hafsa, for doing this and for this very important discussion. I think so. First, I'm going to step back a little bit and I want to sort of describe the situation of what we document, because our organization focuses strictly on women journalists and the violations that take place in the field. And we've just, 2020 just ended. We've just entered 2021. And even in the first 10 days of 2021, we documented several cases of physical interventions by authorities in different ways, which interrupted the work of women journalists. This includes everything from trying to stop women journalists to do their job, and I'm talking about globally. And I know that your question is focused on South Asia and Middle East, but we're seeing that this is also happening in some Western countries. As you know, that in Eastern Europe and the United States, there have been, year-long protests on different issues. Black Lives Matter in the US, which also kind of trickled and spread around the world. And then in Eastern Europe, there have been a lot of, in Belarus, in Hungary, there have been a lot of protests, Minsk, Ukraine, a lot of protests around civil rights issues. or protesting the government, or elections. And so in all of these scenarios, what we have seen that there are some violations that we have to document almost every day. That means that police and authorities are not limited from not violating journalists, which used to be the rule, right? Where journalists had to have access to these places, to public places, so that they could document and communicate to the public what was going on. But we are seeing an increasing sense of by the authorities that they can stop journalists from doing that, and if they, which includes having to, the authorities being allowed to stop journalists to an extent that if they cannot verbally stop journalists, they get physically intervene. So we documented 138 cases in 2020, and 97 cases, which included 97 cases of detentions, which means taking a journalist into a detention center for hours or days, and sometimes for months. Now, when you look at this data, in the 97 cases, majority of these cases are taking place in the Middle East. And by Middle East, we mean 3 specific countries: Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And we know that so there are incredible difficulties in documenting cases in Saudi Arabia. Because of the censorship and the limitations that journalists have themselves in or human rights organizations have themselves in documenting the cases. So we don't know exactly what happens in detention centers. We from very few high-profile cases of activists, we know in Saudi Arabia that when you are in detention, even if you are a woman, there are mistreatments that take place inside of those detention centers. And oftentimes these are gendered mistreatments. The 2 other main countries that we have documented are Iran and Turkey, in which we consistently see 2 trends. Let's talk about Turkey first. In Turkey, it's very, very common for, I have to say, Kurdish journalists to be mistreated. And mistreated will be the word, because when Kurdish journalists their houses are raided, then they're taken into detentions sometimes without any police report or any reason. And then without showing any evidence, it has become a trend in the last 4 years in Turkey that Kurdish journalists can be taken into a detention without any reason, and then they're taken to courts without having any track record that would describe them as, say, terrorists or non-state associated with other non-state actors. I think that it has become the norm in Turkey, sort of, which has eased how authorities can carry out these kind of abuses without any accountability. And the reason is, there's so much of detail in how Kurdish journalists are being treated, or any other opposition journalists who are reporting on issues that the government doesn't want them to report on. It just happens to be that because the Kurdish issue is so important in Turkish politics for as an opposition, that if you're a Kurdish journalist or working for Kurdish press, it's just almost, if you talk to journalists on the ground that we do every day, it's almost inevitable that they would end up into prison at some point, or into detention at some point. I do want to go into a little bit of detail into like what happens in detention centers, that we have recently learned that things are getting much worse when journalists are in detentions or in prisons. One of the most concerning thread that recently happened a few months ago was there were 2 women journalists in southeast Turkey. And also I want to say a lot of these detentions are happening in the southeastern part of Turkey, which is where the Kurdish population is. And, so everything sort of like, which is why the Kurdish journalists, we think, are being targeted much more. And the accountability is much less because of the inaccessibility of human rights organizations or lawyers to be able to defend these journalists. We saw that women journalists were put into male prisons. The reason that was given was that there wasn't enough space in the male prisons. So they were put in the female prisons. So then these women were put into male prisons. But it was what their lawyers described to us is that this is done especially to cause them more mental stress and torture. Sexualized. It's their detention and how they're treated in those male prisons is very sexualized. And they're surrounded by men. There are no women around them. On top of that, sometimes this was going on in the winter when we were documenting this and talking to the lawyers, and it's really cold. And there are all kinds of other human rights violations that take place. For example, not providing enough food on time, treating them badly, and then also misogynistic comments that these women journalists have described through their lawyers. So I think that there is increased violations taking place. And one thing that is really allowing governments to do that, say, for example, in Turkey or in Saudi Arabia, is the inaccessibility of human rights organizations to be able to intervene. And why is that happening? That's happening because a lot of international organizations cannot intervene because they need visas, they need government permission, et cetera, and we're seeing a limitation of increased limitation of access of international organizations by governments like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And then and the other issue is also that the local organizations, because they are underpaid, under-resourced, they don't have very qualified people working with them. And a lot of the lawyers and human rights defenders who work with a lot of local organizations are, younger, and, they often cannot push back the way really professional, well-resourced organizations can do. So I think there are some logistical challenges that local organizations are also facing, which limits their ability to accomplish anything with the government. I was just yesterday, we were doing this, security check for some of our members in Turkey. And we were like, okay, well, if something happens, this is what you do. We have to arrange for lawyers and all that. And we were doing the logistical understanding of what we are going to do in a situation where any of our members are targeted. And we just realized that even if we have lawyers and resources on the ground, once a journalist or an activist is taken into detention, there's not much you can do, because then you're at the hands of the authorities, and the authorities ultimately have the ultimate power to, treat you however they want to.
So given these, limitations or the inaccessibility to resources, whatever, again, still, is there anything that you, as a global women's rights organization or journalist rights organization or different organizations, are there anything that can be done, or are there anything that you can tell us as the best practices?
Okay, well, yes, definitely. I think that there are a few things that we see that are very important that are not done with due diligence, which could really improve the situation. It's about documenting every case, right? So every time a violation takes place, because in some countries, these violations are taking place they're very common. Oftentimes journalists or activists are not really interested in sharing their details because it's happening to everyone around them. So we're seeing that sometimes, not sometimes, but in fact, a lot of times, a lot of these cases go unreported. So reporting a case means developing an evidence, right? So I think that every time something happens, it's very important to invest into, reporting a case about, when it happens, so that there's an archive that is developed of every time any kind of case takes place. Each case helps understand a little bit better about another case as well, because we are by documenting, we are studying how authorities, what tactics they're using, how they are detaining a journalist or an activist, and so on. And how are these tactics different from one city to another, from one country to another, etc. Right? I do want to point out that any authorities in any country, like say Saudi Arabia, Iran, or Turkey, when one country does something and it's successful, we notice that in our work that another country follows. And like, say, if something is working in Iran, Turkey would be like, oh, this is working, we can do this too. And they would do it. And we see that, and when we see that if there are protests, say there are protests that are successful in one place, that also encourages protesters in another place and discourages authorities to do the crackdown. So I think it's very important to share what is going on, document them. Secondly, I think international organizations have one limitation, that is, not having the access and the resources to be able to work everywhere, right? But international organizations are very important to empower local organizations, because these, international and global awareness about these cases and campaign about these cases is essentially what ultimately puts some pressures on authorities, right? And third, I would say that local organizations that have lesser resources could collaborate with each other. There is this issue that a lot of local organizations on human rights or advocacy work on their own, and if they collaborate, it would really make a huge difference. We do see some collaboration, but we don't see a lot of collaboration between local organizations. And I think the work of campaigning can be amplified, or pushing back or asking for accountability can be amplified if a lot of local organizations work together to push back and demand accountability.
Yeah. We know that Turkey is the top jailer of journalists all around the world. So I know that there are lots of women journalists in jails too in Turkey. As an organization, as an organization that speaks out specifically for women journalists, your organization or the other women journalists all around the world, what's the role of them specifically in raising awareness on this specific human rights violation?
So that's a very important question, and it has a very important answer, and that is, what we're seeing is that a lot of times the violations that take place in the field, whether it is about women journalists or generally issues of gender, at large in any country, if issues of feminism or misogyny, et cetera, we see that when women journalists are reporting on these issues, or say there are issues that Kurdish people are facing in a certain part of Turkey or Iran or whatever, when women journalists from that community are reporting on it, they have more insight. So they're able to bring in the perspective that the media at large is not able to cover, because these women are essentially bringing very important details from the community. They're looking at things differently. They have insight into the community, whether it's about gender or it's about other communities, minorities. Women, I think, are able to cover these issues more intimately because of that insight, and that they ask different kind of questions. Also, I think in recent years, the rise of women movements around the world has also helped, create a narrative, a language that journalists can speak. And a lot of, we see that a lot of times women journalists are able to, because of that language, they're able to find it easily to communicate what's happening in communities through their reporting. So I think that how women journalists can contribute to this is really integral to these issues of violations or human rights or gender equity, or violations against minorities or discrimination against minorities. I think women journalists are able to understand these issues better, and they're on the front line of these issues. They have insight into these issues, and I think they bring the perspective and knowledge that we really need right now to figure these things out in different democracies.
Yeah. Thank you, Kiran, for these significant remarks. Now I want to turn to Hafsa, a lawyer, a very young lawyer and human rights activist based in Europe, representing movement for unconditional justice. In Turkish, it's called Koşulsuz Adalet Platformu. Hafsa, can you tell us what happened in Turkey recently that mobilized Turkish society to raise awareness on strip search? As I said in the beginning, it's a very long-term human rights violations in the historical context of Turkey. But what happened recently? And is this kind of a violation increasingly took place after the failed coup attempt? And what's your idea about that?
Well, firstly, I would like to explain a bit about what is strip search. In Turkey, the legal foundation of strip searching is the bylaw within the administration of penal institutions and the execution of sentence and security measures. The relevant legal statute reads, strip search or body cavity search may be conducted in cases in which reasonable and serious indications exist that the convicted has upon himself sustains or objects prohibited to bring it to or to keep in the institution, and in cases in which the senior official in charge deems necessary. Another topic at hand is the search of body cavities. Regulations state that the search of body cavities can only be conducted by prison doctors. In direct violation of this standard, not one of the individuals claiming to have undergone a strip search have the presence of a doctor in the room of the search. Although strip searching is incompatible with human dignity, it is actually a practice that has been in place for many years. As you said, this topic has once again been brought to the public eye by HDP member of Parliament Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu, who called attention to the collective strip search conducted on female students by the Uşak Directorate of Security. Strip searches have previously been conducted during the Gezi Park protests and most recently on those at the Boğaziçi University protests also. Especially in the recent period, the strip search conducted on individuals under arrest in holding cells at police departments has no legal basis. This situation is a clear infringement of the ban on curial treatment. The second question about, as I said, strip searches are only possible in cases of reasonable suspicion. One of the most important standards established by the guidelines is that such a search should be done in a manner not invoking an individual's embarrassment. However, the application of strip search in Turkey has become a systematic and arbitrary process conducted with no regard to either reasonable suspicion or to the legal status of individuals as under arrest, convict, or visitor. Even if possible, even if reasonable suspicion exists for a convicted person to be subject to a strip search, such a search requires the permission of the senior official in charge. Actually, strip search were being systematically conducted for many years, but due to the drastic increase in arrests and convictions following the coup attempt, such searches have been more widely experienced by the public. In addition, I can say that to the strip search in prisons, officials arbitrarily give commands such as kneel, sit, cough, stand. The indiscriminate use of search method restricted to specific circumstance by legal statutes in a way that is completely incompatible with human dignity is a violation of both the Constitution and of international law. With the General Directorate of Prisons being the first, many officials have made statements claiming that strip searches are conducted as per standards set forth in international law. The reality is that even the law is in accordance with such standards on paper, its practical application is in complete violation of human dignity.
Hafsa, what the international law says about that? As your points, but your remarks point to the issues that a permission It's a very important aspect of strip searches. If permission from, in a specific situation, a permission is needed. And also the person who conducts this is very important in this aspect. A doctor should be doing that.
Yeah.
What international law says about that?
Although there is no relevant statute in either the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights or the European Convention on Human Rights, the Nelson Mandela rules have made place for regulations regarding this issue. According to the decisions of European Court of Human Rights, strip search can only be conducted when necessary. One such example is the France decision, is which the court ruled that obligating the applicant to strip in front of other persons and giving disciplinary punishments upon the applicant's refusal to strip is a violation of the Covenant's third article, which regulates degrading treatment.
And Hafsa, I really wonder that if you are in touch with the victims of strip search, specifically the recent incidents in Turkey, can you please share some of examples from these strip search incidents?
Sure. In regard to claims of torture and cruel punishment, the burden of proof falls on the government, which means that the government is responsible for an active investigation into the matter in cases of any such allegation. The most recent case of the Constitutional Court of Turkey concerning strip search is a decision stating that the government violated its duty when it did not pursue an active investigation, noting that the obligatory inquiries and active investigations which would reveal that the facts were not pursued in the case of Rüya Ağday Sönmez. The court ruled that the third point of the 17th article of the Constitution concerning the person's bodily autonomy and physically and spiritual entity, which states that no one shall be subjected to torture or ill treatment, no one shall be subjected to penalty or treatment incompatible with human dignity was violated in application. So there are some examples. Onur Yasercan, he was arrested and then released in June of 2010 on the basis of allegations that he purchased marijuana. However, he was also subjected to a strip search while under arrest. On June 23, 2010, unfortunately, he committed suicide by jumping from his room completely naked. His mother, Hatice Can, found a note in the pocket of her son's jeans after his suicide. The note read, I was stripped naked at the Department of Narcotics, and I was made to kneel on the ground and cuff. They played with my dignity. I was afraid. Betül Alpay, she had already passed through an X-ray scanner before being strip searched in a room with her body being touched. She was then forced through the scanner a second time with her legs bare in front of male officials. And Meltem Oktay, journalists drew attention to the politically motivated systematic use of a strip search in Turkey after she was subjected to torture of a strip search on April 14, 2016, while under arrest at Nusaybin Directorate of Security. In describing the torture she was put through, she said, I was subjected to 2 female police officers, violent strip search, this situation brings a terrible feeling. It was such a situation injuring human dignity and breaking one's spirit. And the last example, Günal Kurşun, is a criminal law professor who was arrested in July 2017. It's Büyükada. It's among those strip search at the entrance to Silivri Penitentiary. And he characterized the situation as inhumane and degrading. And he follows, there is an automatic application at the entrance to the prison. When I was arrested, I stripped in an area called Malta at the entrance to the prison. A male official entered the room after I was left in my undergarments. He requested that I take off and shake my underwear. I had to do what he said. I was not searched by hand after stripping, but many people's body cavities are searched by hand. What I mean is that their bodies are touched.
Hafsa, I can see that you're having difficulty even while explaining the situation, and it's very hard to bear even to listen to these stories. And I know that in your platform, in Turkish it's Koşulsuz Adalet Platform, and in English Unconditional Justice, the Movement for Unconditional Justice. And I know that there are also lawyers or human rights activists in this platform who were also subjected to this violation. What actions are your platform is taking to combat specifically these human rights violations and also in general other human rights violations in Turkey?
As a movement for unconditional justice, we focused on struggling against human rights violations. Specifically in regard to this mission, we get in contact with civil society organization and human rights activists in Europe to be able to push decision-making mechanisms into motion to ensure the application of the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. We have also drawn awareness to especially this problem during our fifth watch in front of the European Court of Human Rights. We called for authorities to create a stricter regulations for the conditions surrounding strip search, and we expressed that arbitrary applications can only be brought to an end with de facto applications. Some of our members who had been subjected to strip search also gave interviews to media organizations like BBC to discuss the rights violations they experienced. In closing, strip search, which have been conducted for many years in an arbitrary and illegal manner, must come to an end, as I said, and should only be practiced as per the regulations when the necessary conditions arise.
Hafsa, thank you so much for your bravery, for your strength, coming here, speaking out against all these, human rights violations, which are hard to explain, even hard to explain. Kiran, I see that from the YouTube comments, there are questions. I want to ask them. First of all, there is a thank you message that you mentioned that this is also taking place in Western states. And a question asks that the reports of prominent international media and journalists, non-governmental organizations indicate the number of imprisoned journalists in Turkey as way less than the reality, as they do not consider many citizen journalists as a journalist. These challenges, make the monitoring even harder. How does your platform, your coalition for women in journalism, define how is a journalist? I mean, I see what an ironic question, lays here. So what's your remarks?
Oh, that's a very good question, actually. And I think it's a question of our times because we have a lot of citizen journalists. We also have a lot of freelance journalists, and especially women who are covering the front lines around the world, whether it's a Western country or Latin America. We see more women journalists freelancing than ever before. Um, and sometimes they are citizen journalists or bloggers who eventually become journalists, or sometimes they're freelancers. So, how we identify is essentially by looking at people's work and their bylines. There are two areas here. Sometimes, depending on the kind of work we're doing, if we are documenting violations, anything that falls under violation of freedom of speech, anyone who's working on free speech. Even sometimes there are activists who are also columnists, and they are silenced or impeded in the field while they're reporting on something. For us, that is a case of free speech. So any kind of violations that take place under to obstruct free speech is something that comes under our mandate, and we document those cases. Then there are these other kind of profiles that we do on women journalists. Obviously, women journalists who have been working for a long time. We do lists, for example, to identify, say, during COVID-19, during the spread of the virus and the lockdown, we started a map of women journalists who were covering COVID-19 around the world. So when we are doing those kind of identifications of journalists, then we are trying to look for journalists who publish in authentic media organizations, and then we do a very thorough research on what those bylines look like, who are these women, and what are they writing, because we have to also do a check on misinformation. We want to make sure that if we are listing down women journalists on our list as profiles, then we want to make sure that these are bylines that are not spreading misinformation. So we do a very thorough kind of check on that. But when there are violations against impediment of free press, then anything really falls under that. Sometimes there are activists or citizen journalists or freelancers who are documenting, the front line, and if they are impeded in any way, we document that and we identify them as women journalists.
Yeah,
because they are, and being on the front line, they are. I did want to just change just one thing I wanted to mention after Hafsa's everything that she mentioned and all these things that you have described, these testimonies. This is what we document, this is why I was saying that documentation is so important, because through the documentation, you learn about the experiences of these journalists or human rights defenders when they are detained or how they are treated. Without documenting, we wouldn't know what is going on in these prisons. And we have some limitations in documenting what is happening in Iran and Saudi Arabia because of the censorship being so high. And also in Turkey, I think the censorship being so high, we have a lot of difficulty documenting these cases because it is so important to know these details about what the authorities are doing and how they are violating laws, to do the things and they're using the laws. Essentially, they're basically taking laws and misusing them for their own agenda, So I think that's very important. And just one more thing I wanted to mention is that strip search and the violation of dignity when we're documenting these cases, or in human rights, when we are talking about these intimidations, that the experience of feeling intimidated. For example, a lot of activists or journalists tell us they feel violated, that their dignity was violated. So we look at it as an outcome of an intimidation, or an outcome of an intervention by authorities. But what I think is happening is the authorities know that already. They know that violating dignity is going to discourage people from participating. In speaking out or free speech or being in their opposition. And I think knowing that this essentially strip search or detentions or violating journalists and human rights defenders is essentially going to intimidate people. And so this is, I think, it's a premeditated tactic to silence the press and free speech.
Yeah, this is very important. Actually, this was gonna be my last question. What's your opinion to encourage people to speak out against what's happening to them? But you answered that question. And to close, I wanna ask you if there is anything that you wanna add on top of what you said already.
I would just say, Hafsa, I would just say, and I keep saying this, and it's still like not enough to say it. I think activists, small organizations, local organizations, international organizations really need to work together. We have like for generations, we have worked in an environment where all these campaigners and human rights defenders work as independent entities, and everyone wants to sort of, qualify as the, on the front line of defending, et cetera, the press or whatever. I do think that we are at a time where these violations are spreading so globally and in such an unprecedented manner that we will never be able to solve anything unless we all work together as organizations and individuals.
This is such an important point. Solidarity, I mean, it's very important, unity, because, lots of different people from different ideologies or ethnic backgrounds in Turkey are subject to the same human rights violations. So why not coming together and being united? Thank you so much, Kiran. This is very important to point out. Hafsa, there is a specific, special thanks from the Set Them Free board the members, that they thank you a lot for your bravery to share your experience with this ill treatment, your friends, experience with this ill treatment. And we really appreciate you standing up on this issue along with us today. And I would like to, to close this panel, I would like to thank you so much for coming here today. For telling these stories, for telling what you've been doing in terms of to end this, brutal human rights violations in Turkey and all around the world. Kiran, I know that you are dedicated to human rights, issues globally, not just in Turkey. Thank you so much. And I also would like to extend my gratitude to Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu, because he's a very brave, strong person who, is trying to defend people's rights, regardless of their ideologies, beliefs, etc., their identities. And I would like to thank to Sevinç Özarsan, a woman journalist, in Germany. She's an exile journalist too. She helped a lot, these victims of strip search come, forward and say their stories bravely. Thank you so much to our audience too, that they listen to this important issue today. And I hope that these violations would end in a very soon time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.